hope everyone's sat comfortably, and we'll turn it over to Guy very shortly. I'll give you, everyone, a little overview of what we'll be talking about, big picture, in this presentation. So Guy's going to give everyone a bit of an overview of current cannabis policy, the history behind it, where we're up to, what some of the dominoes were that fell that led to the law change, and where we're sort of up to in terms of context around that, and what we can do to maybe influence the future or address some of the issues that have arisen. Talking about the issues that patients are facing, some case studies of what's gone wrong, how we can maybe address some of those issues, make people more aware of the challenges that patients still face. Yes, you've got access, but then there's also a whole host of problems around that too. And then we'll be talking about solutions, what we can do together, how you can support some of these initiatives, and who the lovely people are that are really leading this change and all of the campaign as well. So without further ado, it is time that I hand it over to the lovely Mr. Guy Coxall. And he is now going to give us a bit of a rundown. Most of the time, it'll be Guy speaking. I'll maybe add a few comments between each topic, but I'll conclude and catch up with everyone at the end. But thank you, everyone, for coming. Hope you're very excited. And thank you, Guy, for leading the way on all of this. So over to you, my friend. And yeah, off we go.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Guy, founder of Seed Our Future. As Chris mentioned, I have a background in the industry itself. I used to regulate the CBD market. I was the compliance director of the Cannabis Trades Association for a few years. And I think really that did actually pave the way for legislative change in a way, especially in, bringing awareness of the medicinal properties of cannabis. And, by the time I left in 2019, there were about 6 million people using CBD products, full spectrum at the time. And it was helping lots of people with a range of conditions, even though we didn't promote it as such because the MHRA wouldn't allow us to. But I think that did really bring awareness about medical cannabis before it changed. So to go back into the history, cannabis has been illegal in the UK for 95 years now, which was in 1928, the Dangerous Drugs Act, where they classified it as dangerous as heroin and cocaine and other substances. And then in 1971, the Misuse of Drugs Act came out. So that's 52 years. And that was, basically classifying cannabis as a Class B substance, Schedule 1 substance, which means it has no medicinal value whatsoever, is highly addictive, highly dangerous, and not suitable for any use, or it was classed as misuse. Of course, cannabis has been used for over 5,000 years in Chinese history, over 2,000 years in Indian history as a medicine. And it was actually still available in UK pharmacies until 1973. And that was 2 years after the legislative change. So, we've got a strong history of it. And it's only really recently that it's been considered an illicit drug, a dangerous drug. All of that has been whitewashed now. All of the evidence of the harms has been, explained and superseded with science. Unfortunately, these policies are very much political policies on deterrent effects, which hasn't worked. In fact, drug use has increased fourfold over the last 50 years. So that's a kind of brief history. But then in 2018, well, actually in 1999, the House of Lords, asked the government to look into the medical use and the option of maybe reclassifying cannabis to Schedule 2 to allow it to be prescribed. And at the time, the government, they said allowing raw cannabis as a medicine would seriously blur the distinction between misuse and therapeutic use. So what is misuse? Misuse is just a term, a political term. If you're using it medically, it's not misusing it. If you're using it socially, just as you might do with a benzodiazepine, it's medicinal use. So there's, been this argument of what's medical and what's recreational. I think it's semantics. It's medical for everybody because everybody has an endocannabinoid system. It's essential to health. It's essential nutrition, and everybody should have access. Nobody should be prosecuted. So in 2016, and this has only come out fairly recently, the ACMD, who are the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, they're the scientific panel who assess all the drugs and advise the government. They produced a report basically calling for the government to remove Section 5.2 of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, which is essentially possession. And they wanted to decriminalize the possession of all drugs so that people weren't criminalized, because what they found that the deterrent effect didn't work. People were going to use them anyway, and it actually causes more harm, not just the criminalization factor, which can affect people's lives in so many different ways, but also, it's a war on drugs, as the government have admitted, and where the people, it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on people. So, we shouldn't have this war. Supply is a different thing, but possession should be decriminalized, as it was in Portugal in 2001, which has been very successful. So that report by the ACMD in 2016 has been sat on by the government, by the Home Office, for the last 7 years. And when they tried to release it under the Freedom of Information Act, the government basically said that it can't be released because we're still considering it. So are they telling us that they're still considering the decriminalization of personal use and possession 7 years later? I think that's a bit of a lie. So that's all come out now, which is good because it's in the public domain. So what happened after that? So 2018, the CBD market was well established and thriving. But there were all these children, with intractable epilepsy, having many seizures on a daily basis. And, people were getting arrested, coming back into the country with these kids' medicine that was stopping their seizures, and getting arrested and getting their medicines taken off them. And this led to a public outcry in the national media. And again, politics, it's all about votes. So because it was such a big thing in the media and there was such a public outcry, they investigated it, found very quickly that the medical use was there and always had been. And they decided to change the legislation. So exactly 5 years ago today, on the 1st of November 2018, they changed cannabis medicines to Schedule 2, but they left all other cannabis in Schedule 1, which seems odd because, as I mentioned before, Schedule 1 means it has no medicinal value, highly addictive, highly dangerous. So although it seemed like a great thing at the time and everyone was very excited that, finally they've legalized medical cannabis, it wasn't good enough. The scheduling has stopped people getting access, and we're going to discuss that, but it's also caused a lot of social issues, a lot of issues for patients, and of course, the 1.8 million plus people who are using cannabis medicinally who can't access or afford a prescription are still in the same position. So Professor Dame Sally Davis, at the same time, she put a report together for the government. And when they were looking at the medical cannabis prescriptions, the cannabis products for medicinal use, what they were expecting was things like Bedrocan. They were expecting oils and things from other countries. They weren't expecting cannabis flower to be prescribed, which is the most common prescribed medicine at the moment. And what she wrote at the time was, cannabis has many active chemicals, and only cannabis or derivatives produced for medical use can be assumed to have the correct concentrations and ratios. Using other forms such as grown or street cannabis as medicines for therapeutic benefit is potentially dangerous. And that's a load of rubbish, All right, yeah, you might have some gangs who are growing cannabis without any thought or compassion or heart into what they're doing. They might spray terpenes and things on. So, and it could, depends what you grow it with. But people who are growing their own cannabis, approximately 200,000 people at the minute, they know how to do it properly, and it's just as safe as what you're getting from the pharmacies. So what happened in the first 12 months since the legislative change 5 years ago? There were only 3 NHS prescriptions paid for by the NHS, and they were all for children with intractable epilepsy. And there were 204 private prescriptions in the first 12 months, which is a very small amount, but you've got to remember that the industry was there wasn't an industry. It was just starting to come about. So the private sector was very new, and there were a lot of teething problems and getting out there. So there was a severe lack of public announcements. This is one of the big issues. And institutional education. This set the stage for social injustice, marginalisation for patients, and a great deal of stigma and discrimination. So that was 5 years ago. So what's the current landscape like today? So there's still less than 5 people who are prescribed medical cannabis prescriptions in the UK. And I believe we have one adult here who mentioned before that they are actually prescribed by the NHS. So very much well done for that. There's approximately over 2.3 million cannabis users in the UK at the moment, and 1.8 million of them are known to be using it for medicinal use. So what's the difference between those people who are using it for medicinal use and those people who have a prescription? Well, it's having a prescription, but it's because it's private, you have to be able to afford it. Certain conditions, so you've got a cancer or something, you can't get prescribed for that. So, there's issues, but, you can really have cannabis for pretty much any condition, or even as a preventative. So 69%, that is, out of 2.3 million people, 1.8 million people using it medically. That means 69% of all cannabis users in the UK are using it for medical use, which is interesting. 1.6 million people buy from the illicit market, and that brings in a revenue to the illicit market of approximately 2 billion a year. And as I said before, there's about 200,000 people who grow their own. Of course, they're risking up to 14 years in prison for that. And at the moment, there's just over 30,000 medical cannabis patients in the UK who have prescriptions. So that, in the scheme of 1.8 million medical users who need it, that's only 1.6% of the people who need it are actually getting access. So to put that the other way, that's 98.4% of people can't get access or haven't been able to get access, which is atrocious. And I'm seeing here some issues about radiation, radiated and modes and all that sort of thing. Yeah, there have been issues, of course, with what's been coming through the pharmacies, but you can get that in any form. And of course, it is getting better, but these teething problems do take time. There's currently over 200 products available to be prescribed. The costs have reduced. The costs were ridiculous at the beginning, but they're still expensive. A recent analysis shows that private prescriptions are currently about £6,500 to £7,000 per annum. But of course, also the global economy is collapsing. We've got massive, increases in costs of living. So, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. If you can afford it, you're legal. If you can't afford it, you're classed as a criminal. Also, the research conducted by Drug Science, T21, they found that 97% of those prescribed had no reported side effects after 3 months. So it's very safe, it's very effective, it's very safe. There's very little issues, unlike many pharmaceutical drugs, which have awful side effects and cause deaths and all sorts. So the primary issues faced by patients at the minute, which we wouldn't have expected at the time, are social injustice, marginalisation, stigma and discrimination, and a lot of unlawful arrests, false prosecutions. So how do you distinguish this between people with a prescription and with people without? People for decades have lived in fear of the police knocking on the door, of being stopped on the street, of coming across a sniffer dog. But do medical cannabis patients, even though they have legal immunity, have any less risk of being prosecuted? Well, not at the moment, and that's mainly because of lack of education, which we'll come into. Okay, so key issues facing the patients in the community. So you remember the program Neighbours? Neighbours, everybody needs good neighbours with a little understanding. So do your neighbours have understanding? I don't think so, because many neighbours are causing issues with patients. They smell it, they complain to the police, they complain to social services, try and get their kids taken off them. They contact housing associations who cause issues. There's all sorts of issues. Some neighbours will even contact the DVLA and get your license revoked. And there's issues there as well, which I'll come to. So, neighbours, they need educating. It's all about education. And if you have a legal prescription, I think you have a certain responsibility to help us progress by educating people. So talk to your neighbours, talk to local businesses, explain the legislation. And by doing that, we create normalization, we reduce stigma, and that is the main way to get rid of these issues. Public venues. Just over a year ago, we published a report regarding the Equality Act 2010, because what we were finding were patients were going to certain venues, football stadiums, theatres, pubs, all sorts of different things. And they were explaining to the staff that I'm a medical cannabis patient, this is a legal prescription, I might need to use it on the premises, can we have some sort of reasonable adjustments? And quite often the reaction is, no, cannabis is illegal. If you bring that onto the premises, we're going to call the police, la-di-la-di-la. And that's causing a lot of issues. So you can find this document on our website at www.cedarfuture.co.uk. And it's a great resource to carry with you if you go to a venue, or pass it to the management, and it explains all the legislation. Another thing they normally come up with is about vaping laws, because they say, oh no, there's no vaping on the premises. But what you'll find is that it's not the same as vaping nicotine products. This is using a medical device to administer a legally prescribed medicine. It's completely different to vaping or smoking. And it's relatively safe as well in public venues. So what else? GPs, hospitals, mental health services. There was a report came out on Cannabis Health News recently with Simpa Carter talking about mental health services, where a lot of these patients, even when they're prescribed, they're explaining to the doctor or the mental health services that they're prescribed it, and they're being refused mental health services. Some patients are being refused access to their medicine when they're in a hospital visit, and they're asked to go outside into the freezing cold to vaporize, which isn't right. And GPs as well. GPs don't understand. There was an article I saw recently, I think it was by Leafy, talking about, talk to if you haven't got a prescription, talk to your GP. That's not really advisable, because a lot of GPs don't understand. They will contact the DVLA. They'll put it on your notes. It can cause issues. But if you are prescribed, do talk to your GP, because it is prescribed, it is legal, and you do have those legal protections. And again, if we can get more GPs educated that medical cannabis is legal, they're hopefully going to look into it, do some research into the endocannabinoid system and so on, and hopefully talk to their colleagues. Housing associations. So there's been a lot of issues with housing associations, and you just wouldn't believe it. Housing associations are threatening evictions. They're threatening antisocial behaviour bonds by the police for using their prescribed medication in their own home. You couldn't make it up. So if that happens to any of you guys, do contact me. I've been very successful working with these housing associations. And again, it's education. Once they realise that they're contravening the laws, that it's discrimination under the Equality Act, they normally back off and look into it. And we need to educate these associations. Educational establishments. I haven't had many of these cases, only 2 or 3, but colleges, universities not allowing their students to use their medication on site. Again, I've contacted principals, explained the legislation to them, explained that they could end up in a civil court for litigation, and they quickly put in reasonable adjustments, normally a medical room or somewhere where they can safely vape their medication. Employers. Now, there is an employment paper that I was involved in, me and Mohammed from Sanskara platform. Produced it for the CIC, and that's available on the CIC resources website. If you have any problems with employers, that goes into all of the legislation. It's been checked by lawyers. It's a very good report. The police, I'll come to in a moment. Social services, they don't understand either, nor do the family courts. And of course, that's an issue because, if social services come in and try to take your children from you because you're using a prescribed medication, I would personally call the police and contact them and say, you can't do this, but contact me as well. And I'm happy to support. And the DVLA as well, as I mentioned, the police will sometimes contact the DVLA, neighbours, GPs, and they're getting there with the education through myself and people like Robert Jappy pushing them, but they still seem very, unsure. And what they'll normally do once they get informed is they'll get you to fill in a medical questionnaire, which is all about, are you an alcoholic? Are you a drug addict? It's a ridiculous form. They fill that in, and then you go and see a doctor, and it's normally a urine sample. And obviously they're looking for traces of THC in your system. Of course, as a medical cannabis patient, you're always going to have THC in your system, always have high levels because it stays in your systems for so long. But again, you are allowed to drive, and the DVLA can't revoke your license, although they will try. So again, please do contact us if any of these issues come up. So legal complications. So the average court experience, well, it's appalling. So the main issues and like legal cases I've been dealing with are driving cases. So people being wrongly arrested and prosecuted for Section 5A of the Road Traffic Act 1988, which is exceeding the specified limit of 2 micrograms per litre of THC in your blood. I can guarantee you that every patient will consistently exceed that limit, not just for a short period of time, but there's new research for 2018 which shows that you can exceed that limit for up to 18 days. So, even if you don't have any cannabis for 18 days, you can still exceed the limit. So, it's a scenario that the courts weren't anticipating. They haven't been informed of the law. The legal change 5 years ago, and it's causing disasters in the courts. There's some people in this group actually watching who are going through this situation and have been going through this situation for a while. So when it goes to court, what I generally do is I put together an evidence pack, a defence statement to read out in the court, and in the hope that they'll realise that this person's been wrongly arrested, that they have a statutory medical defence in law to exceed the limit, and hopefully it will just get thrown out there and then. But that doesn't generally happen. It can go on. I think the longest a case has gone on at the moment is 2 years. And, that causes so much stress to patients. They're already, ill people. They shouldn't have to go through these unlawful arrests. They shouldn't have to go through the judicial system and be consistently ignored by the judges, by the Crown Prosecution Service, by defence solicitors. If you call a local defence solicitor who deals with driving law and say that you've got a medical cannabis prescription, you've been stopped for driving, they'll just tell you to plead guilty in most cases. They say, oh, no, you don't have a defence. That's professional negligence. So if you get a solicitor who does that, look into suing them, because they're not allowed to give professional negligence advice, and you can actually take them to a civil court for that. So this causes obviously massive implications on the community, because you get a prescription, you think, well, I'm perfectly legal to possess it, I'm perfectly legal to drive with it, as my practitioners told me, but then these issues occur and it causes a lot of issues. People are going to stop unless these issues get sorted pretty soon. Patients are going to just go to the illicit market. They're not going to get prescriptions, because what's the point? If you don't get those legal protections, you're not sure if the quality is better than what you're getting in the illicit market or what you grow. what are the benefits. So really, we need to work with the industry, solve these problems, mitigate these problems, and move forward in a positive way. So, so we've got some new reports. Am I jumping the gun a little bit here? Yeah, we've got some new reports that are actually getting released today or tomorrow, being Medical Cannabis Awareness Week. So this is the first report. This is a patient leaflet, and it's 4 pages. So it's something that every patient will have access to very soon. It will be available on the CIC website. And it's all about prescribing medical cannabis and driving, but it also goes into the legislation for possession as well, because we are finding that patients are being pulled up by the police or even having the houses raided for their prescribed medication. And what on the last page, it has QR codes. So there's one QR code for the actual patient leaflet, so people can access and print that out. But there's also a QR code for this, which is an evidence pack. So this evidence pack is prescribed cannabis medicines, possession, use, and driving. And as I said, this is getting published this week. Somebody asked a question, what can we do to protect ourselves? So what I would recommend doing is downloading, unless you're going to the patient conference this week, I'll be handing out nice glossy copies of it. But if not, you can download it this week. Keep a copy in your vehicle. So if you get stopped by the police, you can just pass that to them. It gives them all the evidence to stop you getting arrested. But you can also keep it on your person in case you get any problems on the street or anywhere, really. So it's a comprehensive pack of evidence, basically, and that will hopefully mitigate the issues. So, sorry, Chris, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's possession cases, driving cases, family law, and employment law. So as I mentioned employment law as well. Some people have lost their jobs. They've gone into an interview, explained that they're a medical cannabis patient, and the interview stopped. There are legal avenues where you can take this to an employment tribunal, and you can sue your employer. Obviously, it's not something you want to do. It shouldn't even happen. But the best thing you can do is, pass that document via the CIC to your employer and explain the law to them. And, there's myself and other experts within the CIC who can advise your employer on ways forward. Mohammed's very good at that from Samskara platform, who co-authored the report. Okay, so human rights. So, of course, although I spend a lot of my time supporting patients with discrimination cases and legal cases throughout the country, I'm an activist, I'm an advocate, I don't have a prescription, and I want to make sure we support everybody, people without prescriptions. As I said, there's 1.8 million people who aren't in the situation of being able to get a prescription. So what have we been doing? We've been looking at human rights and decriminalization. So in 2009, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime produced a short report. I'm just going to put my reading glasses on for this. I'm getting a bit old. And they said, when discussing the principle of proportionality, we highlighted that with offences involving the possession, purchase, or cultivation of illicit drugs for the offender's personal use, the measures can be applied as complete alternatives to conviction and punishment. So what they're basically saying is that, the 1961 UN Convention, which initially prohibited cannabis and other drugs globally, when they were talking about possession, they were talking about possession in relation to supply and, moving it to other countries. They weren't talking about personal use. So the intention wasn't to actually persecute people for personal possession, as was with the 2016 ACMD report I mentioned before. And then in 2010, the UN General Assembly released a report. I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from that. Criminalization of drug use and possession are implicated in violation of several human rights, including the right to health. When the goals and approaches of the international drug control regime and international human rights regime conflict, it is clear that human rights obligations should prevail. The General Assembly has consistently adopted resolutions declaring that international drug control must be carried out in conformity with the Charter and with full respect for human rights. So what they're saying there really is human rights must supersede drug laws. Millions of people worldwide require essential medicines. That's an important keyword, essential, for drug dependence, pain, other health conditions, but availability is often limited by restrictive drug regulations, failure to implement a properly functioning supply and distribution system, and inadequate healthcare system capacity. So that's what we're seeing at the minute here in the UK. You know, they changed it to Schedule 2 with all these restrictions, and people can't get access to it. It's you know, that's a breach of the human right to health. And the essential medicine part is, you know, everybody has an endocannabinoid system. It's well established now in science that it pretty much balances your entire system, creates homeostasis, and prevents and treats virtually all disease, including cancers. So this has to be an essential medicine. You know, the UN, the World Health Organization, consider things like morphine as an essential medicine because it's used for pain management. But of course, cannabis must be far exceed things like opiates as far as an essential medicine, especially when you look at the safety and efficacy profile. So basically, the UN agrees that cannabis, you know, not allowing people to access cannabis is a breach of the human right to health. There's also this little that was in 2010 and nothing's happened. And then more recently, on the 23rd of June this year, there was another United Nations report basically reiterating what they'd already said, and they want to see all states decriminalize the personal use and possession of all drugs. And that was just June this year. And it was around the same time that the Scottish government also called for the decriminalisation of all drugs, and the time that the ACMD report came out calling for the government to decriminalise all drugs. So everybody is talking about the decriminalising the possession and personal cultivation of drugs. And what they said was the war on drugs may be understood to a significant extent as a war on people. You can't criminalize drugs. You can't criminalize a plant. You criminalize people for their actions. Now more than ever, the international community must replace punishment with support and promote policies that respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of all. So the only issues we have is the UN, what they were talking about was legislation, which is the International Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which includes the right to health as a human right. Unfortunately, the UN failed to sign up to that international legislation, so it doesn't apply here. But what we do have here is the Human Rights Act 1998. And the Human Rights Act has very similar things. It's based on the European Convention on Human Rights. So in Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, you have the protection of private life. And this has also been found to protect autonomy and physical integrity. And now that's very important. So due to the functioning of the endocannabinoid system and the safety and efficacy of phytocannabinoids, cannabis must be considered an essential medicine nutrition for the health and welfare of all humans. So by not allowing us to access an essential medicine is a breach of the Human Rights Act under Article 8. It's also discriminatory under Article 14. So discrimination can be viewed from a social, a medical, an economic, and an individual state binary perspective. Whilst those who can either afford or access private treatment or reside in a developed democratic country with drug legislation that affords citizens their fundamental human rights and freedoms, they're free of discrimination. But if you can't access it due to grounds of finance or because they haven't accepted a certain condition at that point, that is discrimination. So what we looked at was Article 8 and Article 14, and we put together a human rights defence for the courts, which went to court for the first time this year in March. It went to Crown Court. The judge read through the defence that we'd put together, and he accepted that there was a defence to be heard. That's the first time in legal UK history that a human rights defence has been accepted by a court under the Human Rights Act. And that has led the path for this case to get to a court. Unfortunately, the government got involved. They're playing silly buggers, and they put the case back until September next year. The second case, because I had already got several of these cases all around cultivation for personal medical use, the second case got adjourned until December next year. So they obviously don't want this court case to be heard in the courts. But we do have a case that's in a set trial in mid-February next year. So there's not too long to go before that goes to court. We've got top expert witnesses for the case, and it will be a jury trial, so the people will be deciding. Looking at the defence, there's no way that the jury can find the defendant guilty, and if they find him not guilty, that will find the law ultra vires, which is essentially illegal, and it will go directly to the Secretary, the Secretary of State for the Home Department, and the Secretary of State for the Home Department, who is ultimately responsible by law, will have to change the Misuse of Drugs Act to decriminalise personal use, possession, personal cultivation, non-profit sharing, and that will happen in two different ways. It will either be complete descheduling, so complete removal of cannabis from the Misuse of Drugs Act altogether. That's the ultimate goal, but that's unlikely. So the more likely scenario will be for cannabis to be moved to Class C, Schedule 5. Now, Schedule 5 won't only decriminalise personal use and possession and cultivation, it will also allow a legal regulated market like they're trialling at the moment in Germany, like sort of dispensary model. But it will also allow GPs to prescribe, because at the moment, because it's in Schedule 2, only specialist practitioners can prescribe. So it will essentially have a knock-on effect on all of it and help everybody. So we'll keep you informed on developments of that. And there's a little quote here that I really like that I find that I think is very poignant. This is from Nye Bevan, who was the founder of the NHS back in 1948. And he said, "No society can legitimately call itself civilized if a sick person is denied medical aid because of a lack of means." I'll just leave you with that for a moment. So, harm reduction and education. So as I mentioned, the societal harms faced by patients at the moment are inherently related to lack of education. Also, generational stigma. So, in other words, because it's been illegal for 95 years, our grandparents, our parents have consistently told us that, drugs are bad, and knock back your alcohol and smoke your dirty tobacco. And also discrimination. So CEDAW Future, currently in collaboration with the Cannabis Industry Council, as I said, have produced that patient leaflet and evidence pack, and that's going to be disseminated soon to every patient in the country. But that doesn't really solve the education. It does on a case-by-case basis. If you get approached by the police or whoever, you can educate one person at a time, but that's going to take a long time. So we need to work out how to do this on a big scale. So earlier this year at Project Earth Festival, CEDAW Future launched a new campaign, End the Stigma campaign. And if you look on our website, there's a Get Involved tab on our website. And there's already the first campaign that's been there since August, which was contacting your MP with the human rights defence to educate the MPs and get them to lobby internally to decriminalise cannabis in the UK. But later today or tomorrow, there's going to be a new campaign coming out, which is to contact your local police and crime commissioner, your local police force, and your local courts, because the police, the courts, they don't understand the legislation. And these documents have all the evidence there. So what I'm trying to do is get as many people to email their local police and crime commissioner. You could even go down to your local police station with the evidence, hand a leaflet to them and get them to look into it. I would advise doing that with somebody with you rather than on your own, just in case, and probably don't take your prescription with them because the police can be idiots. And also the courts, go to your local magistrates court, go to your local crown court, hand it in, ask it to be passed to the management to assess. Because, you know, if we can get every court, every police station, and every police and crime commissioner on board, that will mitigate all the harms. And then you can walk around in peace, drive around in peace, knowing you're not going to have any issues. So please do get involved and check our website for that. There's also the Medical Cannabis Roadshow that's been going on. I believe on the 5th they're in Brighton, and on the 6th they're in Exeter. I'm actually going to be attending the one in Exeter and giving a talk there. And that's run by the Sanskara platform, who are doing great things. Have you maybe considered setting up a local cannabis social club? You know, it doesn't have to be any illicit activity, but, you know, you could have something for local community engagement, information, advice and guidance, and signposting, explaining to people how to go and get a prescription. You could have a consumption room if you wanted for people who are using their prescribed medications at this point, or just do something in your local community hall, give a talk, hand out leaflets. You know, just get involved, get that education out there. The more people who understand what's going on, and the more people who get outraged as well at how wrong these laws are, you're going to get more people on side. And it's people power. If we get enough people on board, that's going to change legislation, because the government, all they're interested in is votes. And also, of course, next year we've got an election. So, you know, look into who's best to go for the election. Certainly not the Conservatives. And then, so yeah, we'll break down barriers, mitigate harms, and create normalization. It's all through education. Education is key. That's the main issue. So, what do you think is going to be the path for the next 5 years? So we've gone through 5 years of pretty much inaction. You know, so we're going to look at 3 different sections for this. We're going to look at policy changes or potential policy changes, social justice, and industry growth. So for policy changes, so hopefully in February we'll get this law, this court case in the Human Rights Challenge, and if successful, that will change the law and get rid of most of the problems in one fell swoop. But there's no guarantee that that will actually happen in February. And we're also looking to challenge Section 5A of the Road Traffic Act, 1998, because although patients have statutory medical defence to exceed the specified limit in the law, those 1.8 million people, or say the whole 2.3 million people who use cannabis who don't have prescriptions, are getting fleeced through the system. What I mean by fleeced is that there's no evidence. They used to just go off impairment, and if they prove that you were impaired while driving, then you get prosecuted, and that's fair enough. If you're impaired and driving, you should have the book thrown at you. But what they found is that the evidence, as with the Misuse of Drugs Act, the evidence that was created by the expert panel on drug driving, when they looked at the evidence, it was ignored, and they went for a zero tolerance approach. And the government even admitted that it was as a deterrent effect. So they're basically fleecing people as a deterrent to using drugs, even though cannabis stays in your system for a very long time. At the time, they believed that the half-life of cannabis, of THC in your blood, was 1.5 hours, which meant that if you were, say, 5 micrograms per litre, within 3 hours, you would be at 1.25 milligrams per litre, which means you would be below the 2 milligram threshold. but that was completely wrong. So you've got tens of thousands of people being prosecuted, getting a criminal record, having their license taken away for at least 12 months, not on top of the fines, losing their jobs, sometimes losing their families, all because they've got residual non-active THC in their system. This needs to change. So we're lobbying the Department for Transport at the moment, and the DVLA. And what we're looking at now is doing a judicial review. So we're going to do a judicial review against the Road Traffic Act. We're already talking to barristers at the moment for that, and hopefully in the next year that will change, and that will protect everybody. What it will mean is it will basically remove cannabis from Section 5A, the Road Traffic Act, so that only Section 4 can be used where they have to prove impairment. So it'll create a level playing field. So social justice. So there can't be social justice until the laws are repealed. End of. Health, well-being, and human rights must prevail via descheduling or decriminalisation. Decriminalising the personal possession, cultivation, and non-profit sharing of cannabis has to happen. You know, we can't. The war has to end. Repealing personal possession, cultivation, and driving convictions, and provide reparations. So, you know, these people who have been caught out in this war should be getting reparations, having their the convictions quashed. And also, you know, by going for decriminalisation or descheduling opposed to legalisation, what happens with legalisation is it puts it into the hands of the corporations. So, you know, you look at the model that happened in Canada. It was all taken over by big tobacco and big alcohol. We can't allow that to happen. We've been fighting for this plant for decades. So it's really important that the grassroots movement are involved in the establishment of a responsible adult use market. So then finally, industry growth. Where's the industry going to be in 5 years? So it's bound to grow. It's growing at an exponential rate. Has been for the last 5 years, but it will continue to grow. Those teething problems with quality and so on, I'm sure will soon disappear. So, you know, you've also got to think about the CBD market, because, you know, the novel foods legislation from the EU basically changed all the products from full spectrum, which is what you need for the entourage effect, to isolates. And isolates are no good. This is where they went wrong with the pharmaceutical industry. When you have synthetics or isolates, they don't do the job. They cause all sorts of side effects, and it's just not right. You need the whole plant. So I'm hoping. I mean, there was the government did accept the ACMD's response to the CBD market just the other day, I think, where they were looking at 50 micrograms of THC per dose. Well, that's ridiculous. That's 1/20th of a milligram per dose. You know, it's not going to be full spectrum. It's going to be what they call broad spectrum, which again isn't useful medically. So, you know, what we need to do is lobby for the full spectrum products to come back with a maximum of 1% THC in the product, and that would be in line with EU countries such as Switzerland. The MHRA are nice. Now, one of the biggest issues with, you know, getting access via the NHS is because of outdated policy. So with the policy, they look at randomized controlled trials. Randomized controlled trials don't work for cannabis, not for full spectrum cannabis, because you've got 500 compounds all working synergistically together. You know, you can't do double blind clinical controlled trials for something like that. You know, it works for pharmaceuticals, but not for plant medicine. So the MHRA and NICE have to change their policies for natural botanical products and accept real world evidence. There's lots of real world evidence going back 5,000 years globally. You know, there's plenty of evidence that it's safe and effective. You know, nothing's going to change. So they need to really adapt that. And that will allow GPs to prescribe. It will allow it to be prescribed on the NHS. We also need mandatory education regarding cannabis medicines and the endocannabinoid system embedded within all medical training curricula. So whether they're training to be a nurse, a doctor, a consultant, they must be educated. It has to be in the curriculum all about the endocannabinoid system. Until they actually understand the plant and understand it as a medicine, things aren't going to progress. And then finally, development of a regulated adult use market combined with non-profit cannabis social clubs. And this will create education in the community, safe places, combined grows. People will be able to get, anything from CBD oil to high THC and everything in between. That will mitigate a lot of risks for, like, say, people with psychosis disorders, because they'll be able to maybe choose a 1-to-1 ratio, because CBD is obviously antipsychotic and anti-anxiety. Having a legal regulated market will be really useful, but it will also disrupt the illicit market and mitigate harms. So that's what I envisage for the next 5 years. I really, ask you all to get involved. Get involved in the campaigns, talk to people, talk to companies, talk to councils, talk to everybody. Just get the information out there. Use these new resources that we're getting published and get them out everywhere. And that will make a difference. It will mitigate the harms. If any of you do have any issues, whether you're prescribed or not, please do get in contact and we'll do our best to support you. So thank you very much for listening. And
still got a few little slides to go, guys. That's guys run on the policy overview, and we'll do a little Q&A still at the end. I can see a few people are raising hands. About 5 more minutes left, and we'll go through all the questions and do the Q&A a little bit. There's a few things that we want to say just to conclude and round everything up, because there's a lot. It's very easy to focus on all the cannabis elements here, and as a researcher, I wanted to just remind you about some of the other things that can complement some of these cannabis policies, cannabis medicines, things that are going on. There's a lot of focus on cannabis and the products of cannabis to improve health, but there's also a lot of things that you can do in your own life and your friends and colleagues can do in your own life as well to be able to actually improve the efficacy of the cannabis medicines that you're consuming, but also augment your life in other ways. And a lot of the time there is a lot of harm that we're actually accidentally doing to ourselves, whether it be through sleep deprivation, overconsumption of caffeine, dietary factors, whether you're eating all of the essential elements to fuel your endocannabinoid system, for example. So omega-3 is one of the core constituents that your body uses to create all of your hormones, all of your endocannabinoids. And so if we are accidentally shooting ourselves in the foot whilst trying to get the same medicinal benefits out of cannabis or cannabinoid medicines, then you're not going to see often the results you want, and you may end up spending more money on cannabis medicines than you actually need to, for example. And not to mention the effect of alcohol and drugs too. And so there's a lot of different elements that you can also use to assess your recovery, assess your health, and contribute to all of your health as well. Now, there's a few final points as well to make. Everything we've discussed today also impacts a lot of people whose lives depend on this, and not just quality of life, but actual lives. And in some cases, these medicines are life-saving, and in a lot of cases as well, there is a financial barrier to accessing those medicines. So what like Guy was talking about earlier on, there is a significant annual cost. And for some people, they don't really have the choice of being able to just say, oh, well, I'll source it elsewhere or go with other options. There are a lot of people that are suffering and that aren't able to access these medicines equally. And as we've talked about, there's a lot of inequalities that exist. And so in addition to Seed Our Future, GCS, bringing you the presentation today, we're also in association joined with on the same sort of path as intractable.org.uk, which is the epilepsy charity set up by the families of those who this affects, and what they're doing is helping patients with the costs of those medicines. So oftentimes, again, that can be up to several £1,000s a month if there are high doses being consumed, and a lot of people can't afford that. And unfortunately, patients do die, lives are lost because they can't access these medicines and the costs come with it. So in addition to that as well, there is a campaign being pushed by End Our Pain. I say pushed. End Our Pain is really the sort of campaign arm of the charity intractable.org.uk, and they are putting together and leading a petition to improve some of this law, improve some of this access, and try and get emergency access to funding and NHS support for these families that are having to sell their homes, sell family heirlooms just to be able to afford those costs of the life-saving medicines. And going back to, again, the human rights elements that Guy was talking about, if people don't have access to medicines that are essential to their life and health without being significantly negatively impacted, and they can't afford those medicines, we're not really living and fulfilling our function as a civilized society. And so there's all this money being spent, a lot of people are being overlooked in that process. And so you can support Intractable, you can get involved in the campaign, you can sign the petition on the endourpain.org website, and also support intractable.org.uk with their charitable work of making sure that all of the kids that need it can access these medicines, all the families that need it can access these medicines. And they're doing a lot of incredible work. And so thank you to all of them as well for everything that they do to contribute to this. And so it's very much a shared campaign, shared initiative, and a lot of patients are feeling the same struggles and experiencing the same things. So this is our way of bringing those together before Medical Cannabis Awareness Week kicks off. We want to let you know that there's a lot of problems as well to the cannabis medical process system and the experience that patients go through in the process of receiving these medicines and using these medicines as home. Not to mention, again, all of the social issues that come about as a result of once you then get that prescription. Karen has very kindly shared some of the links as well in the chat. So if you want to have a look at the website or donate or sign the petitions, you can do so. We've got a whole bunch of resources across the various groups for whoever is impacted in whatever capacity, more or less. So we've got intractable.org, which has lots of epilepsy information on there as well, lots of support. There is a book that we produced called the Canna Manual. If you prefer to read an actual written document, that's on Amazon, everything you need to know about cannabis. We've also got all of the free videos on the Global Cannabinoid Solutions website and YouTube channel. So we'll be putting some more clips up from this webinar onto the website so that more people, onto the YouTube channel so that this can be shared around. For people that couldn't make the webinar. Obviously, as well, there's the Seed Our Future website where Guy has wonderfully put together all of these materials and consolidated all of those on the website so that they're accessible, free to share. Everyone can get them. CannabisScienceTraining.com. We've also got a whole bunch of safety trainings, educational information. So like I was saying, if you've got neighbors that need to learn what's going on, if you're having conversations with the police or whoever it is in your family, friends, we've put together a free safety training that you can access. All you need to do is just set up a little account, and that's all there, all the free resources you could possibly need to communicate with whoever you could possibly need to communicate with. So what we've got is the free safety training from Global Cannabinoid Solutions called GreenShield. So that essentially covers all of the essential cannabis science, everything you need to know about the law on cannabis, your rights, everything in between. And then we've also got a whole harm reduction section there where it shows you how to reduce the potential negative effects, unwanted effects from uninformed cannabis consumption. And this is a way of really safeguarding your family, friends, your community, wherever they be, to make sure that there is at least some sort of standardized information that people can access. The level of impartial information isn't always great. You hear a lot of great things about cannabis, but there's also a lot of complexities and difficulties as well that come with that. So we've got the GreenShield training, free for everyone. If you're interested in using it on your platform, I think we'll be working with Mo to make sure that all of the Sanskara community can access this and can find it easily. And yeah, what we'll probably be doing now over the next few months is just consolidating all of this knowledge and everything that we've talked about in the presentation today to make sure that there is a center point really for all this information for all the patients, everyone that this impacts. And we really need your help with sharing that, making sure that people can access it, and making sure that people absorb all of that information too, because it's obviously all right sharing it around, but you need to actually know this stuff in order to be able to keep people accountable, make sure that you're making the smartest decisions for yourself, make sure you're informed. And like Guy was saying as well, everyone needs your help, and it's the only way things will change is if you're helping spread this knowledge and information as well, and helping educate your neighbors, family, friends, everyone in between, so that they can bring about that change and reduce some of these negative impacts that we're seeing and some of these additional challenges we're seeing as well. So little bit of time now for Q&A. And before we do the Q&A, I want to say and recognize all of Guy's hard work, because he's spent the last 5 years more or less now going gung-ho, hell for leather, with absolutely zero pay to make sure that everyone has access to this information and that all of these wrongs are righted. And so if everyone could, I think what would be super is if there was some testimonials that people wouldn't mind leaving for the CDAR Future website, just to say about the good work that Guy is doing, that CDAR Future is doing, and as well, make sure that he is speaking with all the right people that can make sure that this information is implemented, and that I think as well, Guy gets all the recognition that he deserves for spending 5 years of his life trying to put all of these problems and put them to bed and turn those into solutions and answers. So I guess a round of applause for Guy for all of his hard work, and also that's cool. And thank you to everyone who's contributed as well and supported Guy and myself with regards to this sort of educational initiative and this sort of whoa, there's some great little icons and reactions going off there. So thank you, Guy, and thank you everyone for coming. And basically, we've got plenty of time now to answer any questions, issues that you've got. What would be cool, and if you're comfortable, if you want to throw any questions you've got still in the chat, we can go through and answer those. And we can take as long as, well, probably 15, 20 minutes, as long as needed, really, if necessary, to answer everything. But also, everyone's emails should be in the group chat as well. I can jump those in there so everyone can email Guy if there are specific questions or concerns, things like that. And also myself, I'll put my email address in there, so if anyone's got any sciencey questions for me, things like that. And otherwise, guys, thank you so much for coming along. Thank you so much for supporting all of this, helping it get helping raise awareness around all of these issues. There's going to be a lot of promotion about medical cannabis this week, but it's really important that that doesn't overshadow and leave behind a lot of the patients and the problems that still exist within the system. It's not perfect, but there's a lot of scope for improvement, and progress is being made, but also there are a lot of people that are sort of being left behind, don't have that support, and there's a lot that the industry can do, there's a lot that patient groups can do and companies can do to really help champion these patient issues and show that they're supporting their community, supporting their patients, and putting their money where their mouth is, basically. Guy's paid for all this, he's funded all of this, and I'll say as well, thank you to Phil Monk and the WTU for donating money to Guy and CDAR Future as well, so that all of this can be possible. There's a lot of goodwill, love, energy, time, and care that has gone into making sure that wherever people are in the UK, Guy's there to be able to support them in some capacity, help them with their case, provide them with some information, just make sure that this isn't as isolating and as painful as it can be, and try and make that as easy and painless, and hopefully solve that problem for future people, kids, everyone in between, nephews, nieces that are going to at some point experience some of these issues. So what I'll say is, yeah, thank you everyone, and we'll hang around for a few minutes if people have questions. Answer all of those to the best of our abilities, and as well, obviously, feel free to email us, ask us any questions, and please share all this information that's out there, all the wonderful things that are on the Seed Our Future website. Feel free to use all of the training links, send all the training all over the place as well. I'll put a link in the chat here again. And yeah, hope everyone's found this insightful. Hope everyone's found this useful. And Guy, I don't know if you've got any concluding comments.
Just before we get into the questions, I was reading through the messages, and I saw there were a couple of messages about do we have to inform the DVLA if we're a medical cannabis patient? No, in fact, do not, because once you inform them, you're just going to get a load of shit. So it's only if you're epileptic, that's the only condition that if you're prescribed, you would need to contact the DVLA, but that's more to do with the condition, not to do with the medication. You don't need to contact the DVLA for anything. Avoid it with all risk. So I'm happy, open to questions. So whoever wants to ask any, please.
There might be a few flying through the chat there, Guy.
All right. So I'm not very technical.
Guy, are you able to publish that defense pack you mentioned earlier? That should all be on the website, my friend, I believe.
It's not quite on the website. It's I've just it literally just got all finalized and approved yesterday. I've been to the printers today. Anybody who's coming to the patient conference, the drug science patient conference on Friday, there'll be a load printed out for people to take away with them. But yeah, it will be on the Seed Our Future website either later today or tomorrow, depending on. I'm in London at the minute, so depending, as soon as I can update the website, in the Get Involved tab, you'll be able to find it there in the campaign. But it will actually be published on the Cannabis Industry Council website, because the documents are actually Cannabis Industry Council. So there is a resources page on the Cannabis Industry Council website. Just search for it, and you'll be able to find the employment paper and these new evidence packs for patients.
Where is the conference at, Guy?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, nobody knows.
I don't know the exact address, but if you look on the drug science website and look at events, all the information's there. I think you can probably still get tickets. There's an online one as well, I believe. We Seed Our Future have a stand there as well, so we'll be talking to patients and advising them and showing them what we do.
And thank you everyone for supporting all of this. We've put our emails, websites, all of the info in the little in-call messages here, and there's some very lovely messages as well. So thank you everyone for all of the lovely things you've said. And if you can help us connect with companies, people, organizations that are out there that should have access to this information, should get these trainings, should know these options and opportunities that are maybe there beyond the law, or that maybe that the law hasn't seen, let us know. Introduce us to anyone. You've got our emails there as well, so any ideas, questions, comments, concerns, we'll do our best to make sure that everyone's got all the support they need and all the information they need. And if you follow Guy or me or Seed Our Future or Global Cannabinoid Solutions on social media, we'll be putting out a whole host of different webinars, talks, things like that as well, where we'll be covering over some of these issues, maybe having more specific conversations on driving or on patient safety, neighbors' work. So we'll make a little webinar series of some sorts, I think, around some of this, just to make sure that it's all as visible as possible. There's a lot of information that's out there there's a lot of stuff that we've discussed. There's a lot of text. So we're just making our best efforts to make sure that all of this is accessible, whatever format people enjoy. They can read it, they can watch it, or just get some of the bonus information, snapshots, let's say, or infographics. But yeah, guys, if it seems as though there aren't too many more questions coming through.
There's one here that I noticed about medical cards for legal validation. Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have this in a card, but I do believe that there's a clinic now who are just in the process of producing a sort of medical card, which will probably have the QR code linked to it. So that if you get stopped by the police, they'll be doing that. And I think we're going to be pushing for all clinics to do the same, so that like every patient will have a card which will have a link to all the resources for police or whoever. But yeah, it's early days. But I did hear that the other day.
Yeah. And there's a lot of every policeman, every profession is going to absorb the information differently. So don't over rely on cards and expect to get all of the immutable defense that you think you might or think you should. So there's again a lot of people. There's a postcode lottery going on, and wherever you are in the nation, different police forces have different approaches to interpreting some of those safety measures. Like I was saying, not everyone likes prescriptions. Some people prefer cards, and in other cases, people don't care whether you've got a card or prescription. They see cannabis and it's like seeing red. They're going to put you in prison and treat you, at least process you accordingly like the rest of the citizens. So again, education, key tool. Contact your colleagues, join the campaign, share the information, make sure everyone knows about this stuff, and look after yourselves, stay healthy, stay happy, and we'll love you and leave you if that's all the questions that we've got.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you all attending, and yeah, stay safe out there, and please do get involved. And yeah, as I said, once this patient leaflet comes out, send it. Go into your local courts, go into your local police station, just educate, and that will mitigate the harms. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.